Bright Tuty. Every student matters.
Hello children, welcome to the session. In the previous session, we have discussed that how do you classify the objects based on the material that is used to make them. So now we will move ahead with the chapter and we will discuss about the properties of the materials, because a particular type of material can be used to make different objects. For example, just imagine you have to store some water. So what type of material you will use to make the container for it? Can you make a container for water using a cloth or a towel? No, you cannot store water in towel. As you can observe from the picture, what will happen? So you can store it either in a glass tumbler or a steel tumbler or any other metal like copper. So you need some hard substance to make a material in order to store water. So now we have understood an important point over here, and what does it state? It states that we choose a material to make an object depending on its properties and the purpose for which we are using, for which the object is to be used. For example, the example that we took, that is the purpose of our purpose was to store water. And how did we selected the material to make a container for water? By looking at its property, that is we have selected a hard substance wherein we can store or hold water. So we choose the materials based on the property of the material and the use that we have to, the purpose of the object that we are making. Okay, so let us now move ahead and we will discuss about the appearance. Usually all the materials are different from one another. For example, wood looks different, very different from paper. Although paper is made from bark of trees, that is wood only, but the material is completely different. Then metals will look even different from wood, and you can clearly distinguish between the different materials. So let us now move ahead with the activity. What you are going to do is you will cut small pieces of different materials like paper, cardboard, wood, copper wire, aluminium sheet and a piece of chalk. And what you are going to do is you will separate the shiny objects from them. And when you have separated them, you will observe that this shining property is known as luster. And all the metals have the property of luster, that is shining property. So you have classified or sorted the materials into the group, and this group is metal. Okay, and you will observe that only in some metals only the freshly cut metal is shiny, and after some time they become dull and they do not shine. And why does this happen? This happens because the surface of metal starts corroding. Some of the materials that are very reactive reacts with air and moisture that is present in the atmosphere, and it starts to corrode. For example, iron. And this is the most common example that you might have observed in your coolers, that after some time the outer layer starts developing a powdery brownish reddish brown flaky substance, and this reddish brown substance is rust, and this process is known as rusting of iron. And in the coming session we will discuss about more of such properties of the materials that we are going to use in order to make certain objects. The topic that we are going to discuss is the properties of the material, and the next property that we are going to study about is the hardness of it. So what we are going to do is we will collect a few objects from our surroundings, that is it may be a metal key, iron nail, candle, chalk, cotton, sponge and different other objects, may be wood, a wooden block and so on. You can collect as many objects as you wish. Now what you are going to do is you will try to compress and each of the object one by one and finally write it down or record your observations, and you will observe that certain materials or certain objects can be compressed easily while certain other objects cannot be compressed at all. and the objects which can be easily compressed or scratched are known as soft materials, and the objects which cannot be compressed and which are difficult to compress are called as hard materials. So this is the property of material, which is hardness. So I think after conducting this activity, you will be clearly able to identify that which are hard objects and which are soft objects. So let us now move ahead to the next property of material, which is the solubility. Whether the material is soluble or insoluble. Okay. So for this, we will conduct another activity. You will collect samples like sugar, salt, chalk powder, sand and sawdust, and you will take 5 different glasses or 5 different beakers, and you will fill each of them with 2/3 with water. And now you will add a small amount of sugar to the first glass or the beaker, then you will add salt to the second beaker and add small amount of all the substances that you have collected to each of the beaker. And now you will stir it a little, and you will observe that some of the substances are completely dissolving into the water, like salt and sugar. After stirring for some time, for a few seconds, you will observe that they completely disappear into water. What has happened to them? They have dissolved in water. So these substances are known as soluble substances. Then there are few other substances like sand, sawdust and chalk powder that even after stirring for few minutes, you will observe that they do not dissolve into water, and such substances are known as insoluble substances. What they are known as? They are known as insoluble substances. So we will now look at the definition of both of these. So the substances that completely dissolve in water are called as soluble substances. Then we have the substances that do not dissolve in water are called as insoluble substances. So I hope that after this activity you will be able to completely identify the objects as soluble and insoluble. Now let us move ahead to the next activity. Now we will take a few substances which are in the liquid state. First we have taken solid substances. Now we will take some liquid substances like vinegar, lemon juice, mustard oil, coconut oil, kerosene, some other oil, maybe a little honey you can take. And similarly you will take different beakers. You will take as many beakers as the number of substances that you are taking. Okay. And you will again fill it half 2/3 with water, and now add a few spoonfuls of each of the liquid that you have taken. Stir it well and let it stand for a few minutes. And similarly you will observe that vinegar, lemon juice and coconut water will be soluble in water, and they are known as soluble liquids. Okay. And there will be certain other liquids like any kind of oil will just float at the top and will form a different layer at top of water, and you will observe that these are not soluble into water. So the liquids that completely dissolve in water are known as soluble liquids, and the liquids that do not dissolve and form a separate layer in water are known as insoluble liquids. Okay. Now before moving ahead, our friend Bujo is having a query regarding soluble and insoluble substances. Let us see what he wants to know. Bujo suggests that we check if the liquids that we use in activity 5 mix well with some liquids other than water. That is, he wants to know whether these liquids are soluble with each other or not. And if they are soluble with each other, then we call them as miscible liquids. And what does this mean? Miscible means the liquids which can be mixed into each other completely. That is, they completely mix into one another. For example, lemon juice and vinegar may mix very well with each other, whereas some of the oils may mix well with each other. So you can test this by conducting this activity, and you can then classify those liquids as miscible if they are completely mixing with each other, and if they do not mix with each other, then you will call them immiscible liquids. Okay, and it will be a fun fact for you to know that some of the gases also are soluble in water, and one such example is that of oxygen gas. But you may ask, ma'am, how do you know that oxygen is soluble in water? And we have a substantial proof that oxygen is present in water. And what is that proof? The proof is that all the aquatic life that is surviving underwater, that is the aquatic plants and animals, need oxygen for their process of respiration, and they take this oxygen which is dissolved in water. Isn't it fun to know? So this was all about the solubility property, and we have studied that the substances, whether they are solids or liquids and gases, if they are soluble in water, we call them soluble solids or liquids, and if they are not completely dissolving in water, they are known as insoluble solids or insoluble liquids. And then we have also discussed whether two liquids are completely dissolving in one another. If they are dissolving into one another, we call them miscible liquids, and if not, we call them immiscible. And since we have already conducted the activities 4 and activities 5, you would have observed that certain objects separates out of water and they do not dissolve in it. So some objects float in water while some other objects will sink in it, and same is the case with the liquids. Some of the liquids dissolve and some of them separate out and float at the top of water, as you can observe in the picture. Like, we have a layer of oil that has been formed at the top of water. Okay, and some of the objects may float. They may include a balloon, a pin, or an empty water bottle. So these are a few examples of the objects that may float on the top of water. Then there are certain objects like a heavy metal ball will sink in water. So I think you can identify the objects whether they will float or they will sink in water. So let us now move ahead with the chapter, and we will discuss about the property of transparency. So say you have to play a game of hide and seek with your friends. Okay, so where do you prefer to hide? Behind a glass window or behind an almirah which is made up of wood? And the answer is very obvious. I know everyone will select to hide behind a wooden almirah. Why? Because everyone will be able to see through the glass window. So this is the property of transparency, that is, those substances through which we can see things clearly are known as transparent objects, and the objects through which we cannot see are known as opaque objects. And you can also observe this with this picture that Paheli and Buju are holding, that the object through which we can see through it is known as a transparent object, and the object through which we cannot see through is known as an opaque object. And you might have also observed in shops where shopkeepers prefer to keep their objects in glass containers. Why? So that their customers can easily see through them and they can select their maybe toffees or some sweets in the glass container. Okay, so glass is a see-through material, that is, it is a transparent material. Now we will conduct one more activity. You will take a sheet of paper and try to look through it towards a lighted bulb, and you will not see the light very clearly. Now what you are going to do is, now you will put 2 to 3 drops of oil on the piece of paper and look towards the lighted bulb through that portion of the paper on which you have poured a few drops of oil, and you will be observing that you can slightly see through the paper now, and such material through which objects can be seen but not very clearly. So we can say we can see through the objects partially are known as translucent objects. And you can observe this from the picture. We have a transparent window through which we can see clearly. Then we have this translucent window through which we can see partially, and then we have an opaque fencing through which we cannot see entirely. So we have in transparency we have three types of material. One is transparent, through which we can see clearly. Then we have translucent, through which we can see partially. Then we have opaque objects through which we cannot see the objects. So these are not see-through materials, opaque objects. Okay.
To find out transparent, opaque and translucent materials. Materials required: white sheet of paper, oil. Method: look through the clear glass window pane of your bedroom. You will be able to see the things clearly outside your bedroom in spite of the fact that there is solid glass in between you and outside. Such materials through which you can see are called transparent materials. Now place a white sheet of paper on the glass window pane and look through it. You notice that you cannot see anything through paper. Such materials through which you cannot see are called opaque materials. Now remove the paper and in the middle of it pour few drops of any kind of oil. When the oil spreads on the paper, place it on the glass window pane and look through it. You notice the objects outside are faintly visible. Such materials through which you can see partially are called translucent materials.
And our friend Paheli is now having a query for you, and she wants to know whether your palm is translucent or not. That is, you will take a torch, place your hand over it, switch on the torch, and you will observe that you can see the light through your hand. You can observe this from this picture as well. And so when the light passes through your palm, you can see through partially. So you can say that palm is translucent. So what we are doing, we are covering the glass torch with the palm, switch on the torch, observe from the side of the palm, we see the light of torch passes through the palm, but not clearly, that is partially. And this experiment shows that our palm becomes translucent when a strong beam of light passes through it. I hope our friend Paheli will be satisfied with our answer and she will be understanding the concept of translucent. Okay, so this was all about sorting materials into groups. But wait, we have a query over here, that is, why do we need to separate or sort the materials into groups? Why do we do that? So in your homes also you would have observed that you place all the pulses and cereals on one side, you place all the bakery products on some other side. That is, you keep the objects organized. And what is the purpose of keeping these goods organized at your house? For the convenience, so that when you need some object, you would have the idea where you would have kept it. Why? Because you have kept the similar objects together, that is into groups. And this is what happens in grocery stores, that they have so many items or goods that they might get confused that where they have kept these objects. So what do? They group the objects, similar objects together and place them in an organized way. So we group the materials into group for the convenience and for studying the properties of these materials in a better way. So I hope that you now know how to group the objects on the basis of the material and why do we need the process of sorting the materials into groups. Thank you, and I hope that you really enjoyed this session.